The air before dawn over Biscayne Bay carries a unique weight. It tastes of salt, of mangrove decay, and of something ancient and heavy, like wet limestone. In this pale, pre-light, a silhouette resolves itself against the lightning sky. It is not the jagged line of modern Miami, nor the low profile of a coastal hammock. It is something impossible. A Venetian palazzo, a Roman folly, a fairy tale stone barge permanently moored to the Florida coast. This is Vizcaya. As the first rays of the sun catch the oolitic limestone, the facade glows with a warm, honeyed light, a calculated performance of old-world permanence. The water in the formal gardens lies still as black glass, reflecting a perfect, manicured world of classical sculpture and geometric precision. The silence is profound, almost theatrical. It is the kind of quiet that costs an extraordinary amount of money to create and even more to maintain. This is the hook, the glorious, seductive lie of the place. It presents itself as a sanctuary of peace, a refuge of aristocratic leisure plucked from the fevered dream of the Gilded Age. But every stone in this fantasy is a testament to a deeper, more frantic reality. The silence is not an absence of noise. It is the suppression of it. The beauty is not effortless. It is the product of a hidden, roaring machine. Vizcaya was conceived as an escape, a fortress against the clang and grime of industrial America, a bulwark against the ravages of time and the failings of the human body. But what happens when the fortress becomes the prison? What is the true cost of building paradise in a swamp, and who ultimately pays the bill? This is not a story about a beautiful house. It is a story about the ghost in the machine, the desperate human engine that powers the dream, and the tragic, foreboding truth that some walls, no matter how beautiful, are built not to keep the world out, but to keep a single, frightened man in. The illusion is the first thing you must understand, because its power is total. It was designed to overwhelm, to disorient, to transport. Standing on the East Loggia, looking out across the stone barge and the endless blue of the bay, you are no longer in South Florida. The carefully orchestrated vista, framed by heroic arches and guarded by marble gods, insists you are somewhere else entirely. Somewhere older, grander, more important. Every detail collaborates in this conspiracy. The pockmarked columns, deliberately aged and distressed. The faded tapestries depicting forgotten ducal hunts. The ceilings, ripped from Italian villas and painstakingly reassembled thousands of miles from their origin, bearing the faint, ghostly weight of lives lived and lost centuries ago. Paul Chalfin, the house's artistic director and Deering's co-conspirator in this grand deception, was a master of manufactured authenticity. He understood that to create a convincing past, one had to curate not just beauty, but the appearance of decay. The salt air of the Atlantic was a welcome collaborator, lending a patina of genuine corrosion to imported ironwork. The relentless sun bleached wood and fabric, giving it the weary grace of age. The very climate of this untamed place was weaponized in service of the aesthetic. They were building a ruin in reverse, a place that arrived old, a history that was bought and paid for by the ton. The house breathes an air of quiet contemplation, of scholarly repose. It feels like a place where generations of a noble family have whiled away their afternoons, reading poetry and gazing at the sea. But this is the most potent illusion of all. Vizcaya was never a family home. It was the dominion of one man, a bachelor, James Deering, who would live here for less than a decade. The curated quiet was not for a bustling family, but for the solitary footsteps of a man haunted by his own mortality. It is a stage set for a play that was never fully performed, a magnificent vessel for a life that was already running out of time. The grandeur is lonely. The scale is oppressive. It is a house built for crowds that rarely came, for echoes in empty rooms, a testament to the fact that you can import 1,000 years of European history, but you cannot purchase a single moment of genuine peace. The entire edifice is a paradox, a monument to a past that never happened, in a place it should never have been. To walk through its formal rooms is to be seduced by a beautiful, meticulously crafted falsehood, and the deeper you go, the more you sense the profound, melancholic emptiness at its heart. The facade is perfect, yes, but it's just the facade. And behind it, Beneath it, the true story of Vizcaya is waiting in the dark, where the air is hot and the noise is constant. The central nervous system of Vizcaya is not in the sun-drenched courtyard or the opulent reception rooms. It is buried, hidden deep within the foundations, a dark mirror to the world of light and air above. To understand this place, you must descend, down narrow, winding service stairs, into a world of whitewashed brick, exposed pipes, and the low, constant hum of machinery. This is the engine room, the mechanical underworld that makes the dream of the upstairs possible. Here, the curated silence is shattered by the clang of steel, the roar of furnaces, and the hiss of steam. The air is thick with the smell of coal smoke, hot oil, and human sweat. It is a world of pure, unadorned function, a 20th century industrial plant hidden beneath an 18th century fantasy. The contrast is jarring, a deliberate architectural schizophrenia. Every luxury above has a loud, dirty, and laborious counterpart below. The silent, discreet electric lamps in the library are powered by massive, thrumming generators in the basement, requiring constant stoking and maintenance. The hot water that fills the marble bathtubs is heated in enormous boilers that turn the subterranean level into a sweltering inferno. The fresh, chilled food served on priceless porcelain originates in cavernous kitchens and is kept in walk-in ice boxes, cooled by a complex and noisy ammonia refrigeration system. There was a central vacuum system, its pipes snaking through the walls like metallic arteries, the suction motor roaring in the depths. A state-of-the-art telephone switchboard, the size of a small room, connected this isolated villa to the outside world, a constant reminder of the commerce and industry Deering sought to escape. This was the great unspoken secret of the Gilded Age country house, that the appearance of effortless pre-industrial grace was only achievable through the most advanced and most hidden industrial technology. The house was a machine for living, and the servants were its human cogs. They inhabited this hidden world, their lives governed by the relentless demands of the technology they operated and the whims of the man upstairs. Their quarters were Spartan, their work was grueling, and their existence was designed to be invisible. An intricate network of secret passages, dumbwaiters, and service corridors allowed them to move through the house like ghosts, cleaning, repairing, cooking, and serving, all without disturbing the serene illusion of the main living spaces. They could hear the laughter from the music room through the walls. They could smell the expensive cigars, but they were not part of that world. They were the infrastructure, the living, breathing machinery that kept the fantasy alive. This physical separation between the upstairs and downstairs was more than just a matter of convenience. It was a rigid enforcement of a social hierarchy. The beauty of the upper floors was a direct function of the grime of the lower ones. The leisure of the master was paid for by the labor of the servant. Vizcaya, therefore, is not one house but two. There is the house of exquisite surfaces, of silk and marble and art. And there is the house of raw mechanics, of iron and steam and sweat. One is a fiction, the other is the truth. And the genius, or perhaps the tragedy, of the design is how perfectly the former conceals the latter, creating a world of seemingly magical ease, where everything works perfectly, as if by divine will, while the reality is a story of relentless, exhausting, and utterly human effort. The silence you hear in the gardens is the product of the noise you don't. The stillness is the result of frantic activity. It is a monument built on a foundation of calculated invisibility. To truly grasp the essence of Vizcaya, one must first understand the man who willed it into existence, James Deering. He was not a boisterous tycoon in the mold of a Rockefeller or a Carnegie. He did not build empires of steel or oil for public consumption. He was a quieter, more reserved figure, a lifelong bachelor who inherited, rather than forged, the source of his immense wealth. His family's company, Deering Harvester, which later merged to become the Titan International Harvester, was at the forefront of agricultural mechanization. It was a business of noise, of iron and steel, of efficiency and mass production, a symbol of the very industrial modernity that defined turn-of-the-century America. And James Deering, it seems, wanted nothing more than to escape it. His fortune was new, born of the factory and the assembly line, but his tastes were ancient. He looked not to the future, but deep into the past, to an imagined Europe of aristocratic grace, landed gentry, and timeless beauty. This yearning was not just aesthetic. It was profoundly personal, rooted in a deep-seated anxiety about his health. Deering suffered from pernicious anemia, a debilitating and, at the time, fatal blood disorder. The diagnosis cast a long shadow over his life, instilling in him a constant awareness of his own fragility. His wealth, which could buy anything, could not buy him health. It could not stop the slow, inexorable decay of his own body. And so, Vizcaya becomes something more than a rich man's whim. It becomes a desperate act of self-preservation. It was a project born not of hubris alone, but of fear. He was advised by doctors that a warmer climate might prolong his life, and so he chose the wild, untamed coast of South Florida. But he would not simply live there. He would construct a world, a fortress where every element was under his control. In Chicago, he was subject to the chaos of the city, the demands of his business, and the treachery of his own biology. In Vizcaya, he would be king. He could control the views, the temperature, the art on the walls, the very flow of life within his domain. The construction of the estate was an obsessive, all-consuming project, a way to channel his anxieties into a tangible, monumental form. If he could not fix the complex machinery of his body, he could at least build a perfect machine of a house. If he could not stop his own aging, he could surround himself with objects that had already withstood centuries. The house was his armor. Its thick stone walls were a shield against the world. Its meticulously planned gardens were an attempt to impose order on the chaos of nature, just as he wished he could impose order on the chaos within his own blood. He was building more than a winter retreat. He was building a sanctuary, a personal hospital, a fortress against death itself. Every decision, from the placement of a doorway to the acquisition of a 16th-century tapestry, can be seen through this lens. It was a frantic effort to create a legacy, to carve his name into stone, to build something so solid and enduring that it might, by sheer force of will, grant him a taste of the immortality that his own body denied him. This is the psychological blueprint of Vizcaya. It is the physical manifestation of a profoundly unwell man's dream of perfect health, a monument to a desperate, and ultimately futile, battle against the one force no amount of money could ever defeat. The house was meant to be his cure, but it would become his gilded cage. The vision of Vizcaya was Deering's, but the architect of its soul was Paul Chalfin, an artist, a designer, and a man of formidable taste and even more formidable ambition. Chalfin was not merely a hired decorator. He was the project's artistic director, its curator, its mastermind. The relationship between the reclusive, ailing industrialist and the flamboyant, worldly aesthete is the central creative partnership of Vizcaya. Deering provided the near-limitless funds and the core desire for a European sanctuary. Chalfin provided the expertise, the vision, and the obsessive attention to detail that would transform a vague dream into a material reality. He was, in essence, the enabler of Deering's fantasy, the man who knew how to turn a fortune made from tractors into a convincing facsimile of a centuries-old Italian estate. Their collaboration began with a grand tour of Europe, a shopping spree of epic proportions. But they were not buying souvenirs. They were buying history itself, piece by piece. They prowled the auction houses and decaying palazzi of Italy, Spain, and France, acquiring entire rooms. Fireplaces, ceilings, doorways, floors, wrought iron gates, and wall panels were purchased, catalogued, dismantled, crated, and shipped across the Atlantic to the mosquito-infested coast of Florida. This was not collecting. It was architectural salvage on an industrial scale. The villa was not so much built as it was assembled, a Frankenstein's monster of aristocratic European fragments, stitched together to create a new, artificial whole. Chalfin's genius lay in his ability to blend these disparate elements into a cohesive, if theatrical, narrative. He conceived of the house as the ancestral home of a fictional family, accumulated over generations. A Renaissance-style room might lead into a Rococo salon, which in turn might open onto a neoclassical loggia. He curated a timeline, inventing a lineage for a house that had none. He was a historian of a past that never existed. This process was fraught with challenges. The materials themselves, accustomed to the dry climes of Europe, rebelled against the tropical humidity of Florida. Wood warped, stone grew mold, and ancient frescoes threatened to peel from the walls. The project became a constant battle against the environment, a war waged by craftsmen and engineers to preserve these fragile European artifacts in an alien landscape. Chalfin's control was absolute. He dictated every detail, from the color of the mortar between the stones to the precise arrangement of furniture in a room. He designed staff uniforms, selected silverware, and choreographed the very experience of moving through the house. He was as much a film director as he was a designer, and Vizcaya was his grandest production. But beneath the surface of this creative partnership lay a complex power dynamic. Deering held the purse strings, but Chalfin held the aesthetic authority. He was spending Deering's money to realize his own artistic ambitions, building a monument that would be as much a testament to his own genius as to his patron's wealth. The result is a house with a curiously split personality. It is Deering's refuge, a reflection of his desire for control and permanence. But it is also Chalfin's masterpiece, a showcase of his erudition and theatrical flair. It is a deeply personal space that is also a highly public performance. It is this tension between the private anxieties of the owner and the public ambitions of the designer that gives Vizcaya its unique, compelling, and slightly unsettling atmosphere. It is a home that feels like a museum, a sanctuary that feels like a stage, a testament to a collaboration that was both brilliant and deeply codependent, forever enshrining the ghosts of two powerful and very different men within its walls. The choice of location for Deering's fantasy palace was, in itself, an act of supreme arrogance. In the early 20th century, South Florida was not the bustling metropolis it is today. It was America's last frontier, a subtropical wilderness of mangrove swamps, dense hardwood hammocks, and sawgrass prairies, notoriously infested with mosquitoes and subject to the violent whims of hurricanes. To the rational mind, it was one of the last places on Earth one would choose to build a delicate, European-style villa filled with priceless, centuries-old artifacts. But for James Deering and Paul Chalfin, the untamed nature of the landscape was not a deterrent. It was the point. They were not looking for a polite piece of real estate. They were looking for a blank canvas, a primordial wilderness upon which they could impose their will. They chose a 180-acre stretch of shoreline on Biscayne Bay, a dense, nearly impenetrable jungle of native vegetation. The very act of building Vizcaya was therefore an act of conquest. It was a declaration of war on the natural environment. The first battle was against the land itself. An army of workers, numbering over 1,000 at the project's peak, was deployed to tame the wilderness. The dense hammock was cleared, the swampy ground was filled, and the shoreline was dredged and reshaped. They were not adapting to the landscape. They were erasing it and replacing it with a carefully constructed European ideal. The formal gardens, with their low, manicured hedges, geometric pools, and imported statues, are the most potent symbol of this conquest. They are a triumph of Renaissance order imposed upon a landscape of tropical chaos. This was not a garden designed to coexist with nature, but to dominate it. Even the view was manufactured. Chalfin ordered the creation of a large, man-made island in the bay, now known as the Tea House Island, to break up the monotony of the open water and create a more picturesque Italianate vista. The most audacious feature, the great stone barge that acts as a breakwater and ceremonial entrance from the sea, is a piece of pure architectural fantasy. A colossal sculpture designed to announce that this is where the wild world ends and the world of man's perfect creation begins. The second battle was against the climate. The relentless sun, the corrosive salt air, and the suffocating humidity were constant enemies. The oolitic limestone, quarried locally, was porous and susceptible to the damp. Imported marbles cracked, woods warped, and metals rusted. An army of maintenance workers was engaged in a perpetual struggle against decay, a never-ending effort to hold back the encroaching jungle and the corrosive effects of the atmosphere. Vizcaya, from its very inception, was an unnatural creation, an exotic species transplanted into a hostile environment. Its existence required, and still requires, a constant input of human energy and financial resources to fight off the forces of nature that seek to reclaim it. This struggle is at the very heart of the Vizcaya story. It is a physical manifestation of Deering's own struggle against the natural decay of his body. Just as his doctors and nurses fought to preserve his failing health, his architects and gardeners fought to preserve his fragile house. The very foundation of the estate is built on a profound contradiction, a desire to create a place of natural healing and repose, achieved through the violent subjugation of the natural world. It is a monument to the Gilded Age belief that with enough money and enough power, anything is possible, even the wholesale reinvention of a landscape. But the mangroves still grow at the edges of the manicured lawns, the humidity still seeps into the stone, and the threat of the hurricane is a constant, looming presence. Nature was tamed, but it was never truly defeated. The construction of Vizcaya was not simply an architectural project. It was a logistical operation on the scale of a military campaign. For over 2 years, from 1914 to 1916, the quiet shore of Biscayne Bay was transformed into a chaotic, swarming hive of activity. It represented a massive collision of worlds. Old world artistry and new world industrial might. European artisans and American laborers, all converging on this remote patch of Florida wilderness. The workforce was a vast and diverse coalition, a veritable army of the invisible. It is estimated that at its peak, more than 1,000 people were employed on the site, a significant portion of the entire population of Miami at the time. There were local laborers, many of them Bahamian immigrants, who performed the backbreaking work of clearing the land, pouring the concrete, and hauling the stone. They toiled under the brutal Florida sun, battling heat, humidity, and clouds of mosquitoes, for wages that were a pittance compared to the fortunes being spent on the materials they were handling. Alongside them were skilled American craftsmen, electricians, plumbers, and engineers, tasked with installing the cutting-edge technology that formed the hidden mechanical core of the house. And then there were the specialists, the master artisans brought directly from Europe to ensure the authenticity of the project. Stonemasons from Italy, ironworkers from Spain, and woodcarvers from France were transported to this strange new world to ply their ancient trades. They were there to reassemble the history that Deering and Chalfin had purchased, to painstakingly piece together the dismantled rooms and ensure that every joint, every carving, and every finish was true to its historical precedent. The sheer scale of the material logistics was staggering. Hundreds of railroad cars delivered steel, cement, and lumber. Ships arrived from Europe, laden with crates containing marble columns, antique fireplaces, and entire paneled rooms. A small village of temporary workshops, dormitories, and commissaries sprang up on the site to support the massive workforce. The project was a testament to the power of international harvesters' money and the organizational prowess of its executives. The same logistical genius that could get a reaper from a Chicago factory to a farm in Nebraska was now being used to get a 17th-century ceiling from a Venetian palazzo to a swamp in Florida. The process was a study in contrasts. One day, workers would be using dynamite to blast a channel through the coral rock of the bay. The next, a team of delicate artisans would be using fine brushes to touch up the paint on a fragile Rococo panel. The brute force of modern construction existed side by side with the painstaking finesse of historical restoration. It was a project that looked simultaneously backward and forward, using the most advanced 20th century techniques to recreate a fantasy of the 18th century. But this army of workers, the true builders of Vizcaya, remains largely anonymous. They are the invisible foundation upon which the entire grand illusion rests. Their sweat and toil are baked into the very mortar of the walls. While Deering and Chalfin planned their aesthetic triumphs in comfortable offices, these men battled the elements to give them form. The story of Vizcaya's construction is therefore not just a story of art and architecture, but a story of labor, of class, and of the immense human effort required to realize the dream of a single wealthy man. The finished house, in all its serene and silent glory, bears no trace of this chaotic, noisy, and often dangerous process. The ghosts of its 1,000 builders are silent, their labor erased, leaving only the perfect, pristine surface of the dream they were paid to create. Beneath the opulent surfaces of Vizcaya lies a hidden geography, a world unseen by guests, designed for the sole purpose of service. This is the domain of the downstairs staff, the domestic army required to maintain the illusion of effortless luxury. Their world was a labyrinth of service corridors, steep back stairs, and specialized workrooms, a parallel universe that mirrored the grand spaces of the main house, but was stripped of all ornament and comfort. Life here was a rigid hierarchy, as structured and formal as any European noble house. At the top was the butler, the majordomo who oversaw the entire domestic operation, a figure of immense authority in the downstairs world. Beneath him were the footmen, the maids, the valets, the cooks, the laundresses, the groundskeepers, and the engineers, each with a specific role and a prescribed uniform. Their lives were governed by the ringing of bells, the demands of the master, and the relentless ticking of the clock. A typical day began long before Deering awoke. In the cavernous kitchens, the cooks and their assistants would be preparing breakfast, working with state-of-the-art equipment that included massive cast-iron stoves and the aforementioned walk-in refrigeration units. In the laundry, a vast, steam-filled chamber in the basement, laundresses would be feeding linens into industrial-sized washing and wringing machines, a noisy, hot, and physically demanding job. Upstairs, housemaids would move silently through the rooms, dusting priceless antiques, polishing silver, and ensuring that every object was in its precise, Chalfin-ordained place. They used the central vacuum system, plugging long hoses into wall inlets, the dirt whisked away to a central container in the basement, a process that was quieter than a conventional vacuum but still a testament to the house's hidden industrial core. The design of the house was predicated on the invisibility of this labor. Service corridors ran behind the main walls, allowing staff to move between the pantry, the kitchen, and the dining room without ever entering the main hall. Dumbwaiters ferried food, linens, and other necessities between floors, silent mechanical servants that further reduced the need for visible human presence. When staff did have to appear in the main house to serve a meal or deliver a message, their movements were expected to be swift, silent, and unobtrusive. They were living components of the house's machinery, meant to be efficient and unheard. Their personal lives were confined to the servants' quarters, located in a separate wing. While comfortable by the standards of the day, these rooms were a world away from the gilded opulence of the main house. They were functional, simple, and segregated by gender. It was a life of long hours, hard work, and strict rules, with little time for personal freedom. For the staff, Vizcaya was not a sanctuary or a work of art. It was a place of employment, a highly complex and demanding factory for the production of luxury. They saw the house not as a collection of beautiful rooms, but as a series of tasks. Floors to be polished, fireplaces to be cleaned, windows to be washed, silver to be burnished. They were the keepers of the flame, the ones who truly knew the house's secrets. The leaky pipe in the north wing, the drafty window in the library, the particular way the master liked his coffee. Theirs is the unwritten history of Vizcaya, a story of quiet dignity and relentless work, the silent human counterpoint to the grand, architectural narrative. Without their constant, invisible efforts, the dream of Vizcaya would have crumbled into dust. The house was a demanding master, and they were its faithful, forgotten servants. The financial reality behind Vizcaya is as staggering as its aesthetic ambition. The project was not an investment in any traditional sense. It was a pure and colossal act of consumption, a financial black hole into which James Deering poured a significant portion of his vast international harvester fortune. To understand Vizcaya is to understand that its very existence is predicated on a scale of wealth that is almost impossible to comprehend today, a level of Gilded Age opulence where budgets were not a primary concern. The initial estimates for the project, while substantial, quickly proved to be wildly optimistic. The decision to import entire rooms from Europe, the hiring of master craftsmen, the logistical nightmare of building in a remote swamp, and the obsessive perfectionism of Paul Chalfin all contributed to massive cost overruns. The final cost for the house, gardens, and furnishings is estimated to have been around $15 million between 1914 and 1922. In today's currency, that figure would be astronomical, likely approaching $500 million. This was not just a house. It was a project with a budget comparable to a major piece of public infrastructure. The money flowed into every conceivable corner of the construction. There was the cost of the land itself, the cost of labor for the 1,000-strong workforce, the cost of materials both local, like the oolitic limestone, and imported, like the vast quantities of Italian marble. There were the staggering sums paid at European auctions for the antique rooms and furnishings. A single fireplace mantel could cost more than a typical American family earned in a decade. A set of tapestries could be worth the price of a small town. Beyond the construction, there was the ongoing operational cost. Vizcaya was a machine that required constant fuel, both in terms of coal for its generators and cash for its payroll. A full-time staff of several dozen servants, gardeners, and engineers had to be paid, housed, and fed. The maintenance was a perpetual drain on resources. The fight against the corrosive climate was a war of financial attrition. Every rusted gate, every patch of mold, every warped floorboard represented another bill to be paid. The house was a voracious consumer of its creator's wealth. This level of expenditure speaks volumes about Deering's motivations. He was not building for resale value. He was not concerned with a return on investment. He was spending his capital to build a world, and the price was secondary to the perfection of the vision. His wealth, derived from the quintessentially American business of mass-produced agricultural machinery, was being transmuted into a one-of-a-kind, handcrafted European fantasy. It was an act of alchemy, turning the profits of industry into the trappings of aristocracy. This financial hemorrhage also highlights the unsustainability of such a creation. Vizcaya was only possible because it was built by a man with a fortune so vast that he could afford to ignore the bottom line, at least for a time. It was a product of a specific economic moment, the peak of the Gilded Age, before the introduction of income tax and the economic leveling of the Great Depression. It could not have been built a decade later, and as history would prove, it could not be maintained by his heirs. The bills kept coming, a constant, nagging reminder of the real-world cost of a fantastical dream. Every perfect vista and every priceless artifact had a price tag, recorded in the ledgers kept by Deering's accountants. These ledgers tell a different story of Vizcaya, one not of beauty and art, but of cash flow and expenditure. It is the story of a dream's infrastructure, a stark reminder that even the most ethereal fantasies are ultimately grounded in the harsh, unforgiving logic of a balance sheet. The house was a monument to wealth, but it was also a testament to its creator's willingness to burn through it in pursuit of an impossible ideal. The brief period during which James Deering actually inhabited Vizcaya represents the zenith of its existence, the fleeting moment when the stage was set and the lead actor was in place. After years of construction and unimaginable expense, the house was finally ready in the winter of 1916. Deering arrived to take possession of his kingdom, a world built to his exact specifications, designed to soothe his nerves and, he hoped, heal his body. This was the upstairs world in its full glory. Days were spent in quiet contemplation, perhaps reading in the library, a magnificent two-story room lined with books he may or may not have read, or strolling through the manicured gardens, shielded from the harsh sun by a parasol. He would host small, elegant gatherings for friends and visiting dignitaries. Luncheons were served on the breezy loggias, with views of the bay. Dinners were formal affairs in the grand dining room, surrounded by priceless European art. The house functioned exactly as it was designed to, a seamless machine for gracious living. The invisible army of servants moved silently in the background, anticipating every need. The food was exquisite, the linens were perfect, the temperature was comfortable. For a guest, a visit to Vizcaya would have been an experience of pure, unadulterated luxury, a temporary transportation to a more elegant and refined world. Yet, even in this golden age, the shadow of Deering's illness was ever present. The house was his sanctuary, but it was also a constant reminder of the fragility he sought to escape. The pace of life was slow and deliberate, dictated by the state of his health. While the estate had all the trappings of a Gilded Age party palace, it was rarely the scene of raucous celebration. The atmosphere was one of quiet, almost monastic, repose. The grandeur of the spaces often seemed to dwarf the small-scale human dramas playing out within them. One can imagine Deering, a solitary figure in the vastness of the music room, a chamber designed to hold a full orchestra, the silence broken only by the ticking of an antique clock. The house was a perfect container, but the life it contained was muted, shadowed by a sense of impending loss. He was the master of a vast and perfect kingdom, but he was a king in failing health. The Florida sun, which was supposed to be medicinal, did little to halt the progress of his pernicious anemia. The carefully controlled environment could manage his comfort, but it could not cure his disease. The perfection of his surroundings must have formed a stark, almost cruel contrast with the imperfection of his own body. He had built a fortress of permanence, a collection of objects that had already defied time, but he himself was subject to its inexorable march. This turning point, the moment the Creator finally inhabits his creation, is therefore imbued with a deep and tragic irony. The dream had been realized, the stage was set, but the intended outcome, a rejuvenation of health and a long, peaceful life, remained elusive. Vizcaya was a triumph of will and wealth over the natural world, but it was powerless against the internal frailties of its own creator. The house was in its prime, a perfect, gleaming machine, but the man for whom it was built was already beginning the process of decline. The golden age was to be painfully, poignantly brief. The great house, intended as a setting for a long and happy life, was instead becoming the backdrop for a slow, dignified, and inexorable farewell. The hermetically sealed world of Vizcaya, designed as an escape from the turmoil of the 20th century, could not remain immune from it forever. In April 1917, just months after Deering had taken up full-time winter residence, the United States entered the First World War. The conflict that had been a distant European affair suddenly became a pressing American reality, and its shockwaves were felt even in this isolated Florida paradise. The war intruded in both practical and psychological ways. Practically, it disrupted the final phases of the estate's construction and furnishing. Supply chains were broken. Shipping lanes across the Atlantic became perilous, making it nearly impossible to import the remaining European artifacts and materials needed to complete the vision. The war effort also created labor shortages, as young men were conscripted into the military. The world outside the gates of Vizcaya was now operating on a war footing, a reality that could not be entirely ignored. More profoundly, the war shattered the very illusion that Vizcaya was built to sustain. Deering had sought to retreat into a fantasy of an older, more civilized Europe, a world of aristocratic grace and timeless beauty. But that same Europe was now tearing itself apart in the trenches of the Western Front. The culture he sought to emulate was engaged in a brutal, mechanized slaughter on an unprecedented scale. The priceless objects that filled his home, the French panels, the Italian marbles, the Spanish ironwork, were relics of a civilization that was now committing a form of suicide. The dissonance must have been profound. To sit in a perfect Rococo salon, surrounded by symbols of French artistry and reason, while the youth of France were dying in the mud of Verdun, was to live in a state of deep contradiction. The noise of the modern world, the very noise he had fled from Chicago, was now the roar of artillery, and it could not be shut out by stone walls. The war also brought a more direct physical threat. German U-boats patrolled the Atlantic coast, and there were genuine fears of attacks on American soil. Vizcaya, with its prominent position on the bay, was a conspicuous landmark. The fortress built to guard against illness now had to consider the possibility of a far more tangible enemy. The dream of a peaceful sanctuary was pierced by the sharp reality of global conflict. The gilded cage began to feel more like a target. This external pressure marks a crucial turning point in the story. It is the moment the fantasy collides with history. Deering's project was an attempt to stop time, to retreat into a curated past. The war was a brutal reminder that time marches on, and that no amount of money can build a wall high enough to keep out the world. The serene, self-contained universe of Vizcaya was revealed to be what it had always been. A fragile bubble, beautiful and meticulously crafted, but ultimately vulnerable to the sharp edges of the world beyond its gates. The war did not destroy Vizcaya, but it fundamentally altered its meaning. It exposed the futility of trying to escape the present. The house was no longer just a rich man's folly. It became a symbol of a lost world, a monument to an age of innocence and aristocratic fantasy that was being irrevocably obliterated by the horrors of modern warfare. The turning point was not a single event, but a slow, creeping realization that the sanctuary was not safe, and the escape was not complete. The ultimate tragedy of Vizcaya is that the sanctuary failed in its primary, unspoken purpose. The house, a machine designed for perfect living, could not halt the slow, methodical breakdown of the human machine it was built to house. James Deering's pernicious anemia, the shadow that had driven him to create this fortress against mortality, continued its inexorable advance, indifferent to the beauty and order that surrounded him. The Florida climate, prescribed as a cure, offered temporary comfort but no lasting remedy. The very elements that gave the estate its character, the brilliant sun, the warm air, the seaside location, could do nothing to alter the chemistry of his blood. In the final years of his life, Deering's health declined markedly. He became more reclusive, his energy sapped by the disease. The grand rooms of Vizcaya, designed for elegant entertaining, fell increasingly silent. The house, once a vibrant project of creation, now became a quiet sickroom, a luxurious hospital for its owner. The master of the house was now its patient. The irony is almost too perfect to be believed. He had surrounded himself with objects of immense strength and permanence. Stone that had stood for centuries, iron forged in fire, ancient woods that resisted decay. Yet he himself was wasting away. He could command 1,000 workers to reshape a coastline, but he could not command his own body to produce healthy red blood cells. His vast wealth, which had conquered nature and purchased history, was utterly powerless in the face of this microscopic internal failure. He began to spend less and less time at Vizcaya, embarking on long journeys in search of new cures and treatments, leaving the estate largely empty for long stretches. The great house waited, fully staffed and perfectly maintained, for a master who was often absent. The army of servants continued their daily rituals, polishing silver that would not be used, cleaning rooms that would not be occupied, and tending gardens that would not be admired. The machine idled, its purpose diminished. Vizcaya in these years became a magnificent ghost ship, a vessel waiting for a captain who was losing his ability to command it. The house, a character in its own right, seems to enter a state of melancholy watchfulness. The silence was no longer the manufactured quiet of a well-run estate, but the heavy, expectant silence of a vigil. This period represents the ultimate failure of the Gilded Age dream. The belief that one's environment could be so perfected, so controlled, that it could fundamentally alter one's fate was proven false. The house was a perfect body, but its soul was ailing. The meticulously designed gardens could not produce a medicinal herb potent enough to save him. The library, filled with the accumulated wisdom of ages, contained no book with the secret to eternal life. The fortress had been breached, not from the outside by war or financial collapse, but from within, by the slow, quiet, and unstoppable rebellion of his own cells. Deering had built Vizcaya as a monument to life, but it was destined to become a monument to his death. The body, the one thing he could not control, had the final say. The project born of a fear of death was now inextricably linked to its slow, graceful, and tragic arrival. The house would outlive its creator, just as he had intended, but it would do so not as a testament to his vibrant life, but as the beautiful, lonely tomb of his unrealized dream. The final act of James Deering's life was not played out on the grand stage he had built for himself. In the summer of 1925, seeking yet another treatment for his advanced anemia, he embarked on a voyage back from Paris aboard the steamship SS City of Paris. It was here, at sea, surrounded by the vast, indifferent expanse of the Atlantic Ocean, that he died. He was 65 years old. The man who had spent a fortune to create the most solid and permanent of homes died in transit, his life ending not in his fortified sanctuary, but in a transient space between two continents. The news of his death marked the true end of Vizcaya's purpose. The creator was gone. The machine had lost its operator. The vision that had animated every stone and every plant was extinguished. The house was now an orphan, a breathtakingly beautiful and impossibly expensive relic. Its reason for being had vanished overnight. Upon Deering's death, the silence that settled over the estate was different. It was no longer the curated quiet of a reclusive owner, but the profound, empty silence of abandonment. The house, which had been a private kingdom, now became a piece of property, an asset in an estate to be managed by his heirs, his half-brother Charles Deering and his nieces. The dream was now a burden. The immense cost of maintaining Vizcaya, the payroll for the staff, the constant repairs, the fight against the encroaching nature, did not die with James. The bills kept coming. For a time, the family tried to keep the dream alive. They used the house intermittently, but it was not their vision, not their passion. It was a monument to a man they had lost, and a prodigious financial drain. The context of the world was also changing rapidly. The Roaring Twenties were giving way to the Great Depression. The era of unchecked, tax-free Gilded Age wealth that had made Vizcaya possible was over. In this new world of economic hardship, maintaining such an extravagant private residence became not just difficult, but socially untenable. The house, once a symbol of taste and power, was becoming a symbol of an obsolete and excessive past. The end of Deering's personal dream marked the beginning of the house's long struggle for survival. It entered a period of limbo, a magnificent jewel box with no owner to appreciate its contents. The staff was reduced. The once perfect gardens began to show signs of neglect. The relentless Florida climate continued its assault, and the resources to fight back were dwindling. The house was no longer a home. It was a problem. What do you do with a place like Vizcaya? It was too grand to be a practical residence, too personal to be easily repurposed, and too valuable in its collection of artifacts to be simply abandoned. Deering's death had transformed the house from a living sanctuary into a magnificent question mark. He had achieved his goal of creating something that would outlive him, but in doing so, he had bequeathed an immense and complicated legacy. The house had been built as a fortress against time, but now it was adrift in it, its future uncertain, its purpose lost. The end of the dream was not a sudden collapse, but a slow, quiet fading, the gradual realization that the vision of one man cannot be sustained indefinitely once that man is gone. The silence in the halls was the sound of an era ending. The inheritance of Vizcaya by James Deering's nieces, Marion Deering McCormick and Barbara Deering Danielson, was the inheritance of a beautiful yet crushing burden. They were now the custodians of their uncle's magnificent obsession, a property that was as much a mausoleum as it was a house. While they held a deep affection for their uncle and his creation, they were faced with a stark and unforgiving reality. The economic landscape of America had been fundamentally altered by the stock market crash of 1929 and the ensuing Great Depression. The vast fortunes of the Gilded Age were shrinking, and the concept of maintaining a private palace with a full-time staff of dozens was becoming an anachronism, a relic of a bygone era of excess. The cost of running Vizcaya, which had been a significant but manageable expense for a titan like James Deering, was a crippling liability for his heirs. The house was a ravenous beast, demanding constant feeding. There was the payroll for the skeleton crew of staff retained to prevent its complete collapse. There were the astronomical property taxes. And above all, there was the never-ending war against the Florida climate. The salt spray from the bay relentlessly corroded the ironwork and pitted the stone. The intense sunlight and humidity warped the priceless wood paneling and faded the delicate silks and tapestries. Termites and other pests, native to the tropical environment, saw the house as a magnificent feast. Then there were the hurricanes. The 1926 Miami hurricane, a devastating storm, inflicted significant damage on the gardens and the estate's outbuildings, a brutal reminder of nature's untamed power in this region. Each repair was a fresh drain on the family's dwindling resources. For 2 decades, the heirs struggled to maintain the estate. They opened the gardens to the public for a small fee, hoping to generate some income to offset the costs, but it was a drop in the ocean. The house itself remained largely closed, a silent, sleeping giant. The vibrant heart of the estate, the complex machinery in the basement, was stilled. The kitchens were cold. The grand rooms gathered dust. Vizcaya was in a state of suspended animation, caught between its glorious past as a private sanctuary and an uncertain future. The family was trapped in a classic dilemma of inheritance. They were stewards of a significant cultural and artistic treasure, a unique creation that they felt a duty to preserve. Yet, the cost of this preservation was unsustainable. To sell the contents piece by piece would be to dismantle their uncle's life's work. To let the house decay would be a betrayal of his legacy. But to keep it was to face financial ruin. This period of struggle highlights the inherent fragility of such a singular vision. Vizcaya was the product of one man's will and one man's fortune. It was not designed to be practical or adaptable. It was a work of art, and like many great works of art, it was ill-suited to the mundane realities of economics and upkeep. The heirs were forced to confront the fundamental unsustainability of the dream. The Gilded Age fantasy of creating a timeless, permanent family estate on the European model had collided with the harsh, pragmatic realities of 20th century America. The fortress that James Deering had built was now crumbling, not from a dramatic assault, but from the slow, relentless pressure of changing times and the simple, brutal logic of a ledger book that was perpetually in the red. The true antagonist in the story of Vizcaya, following the death of its creator, is the environment itself. The very elements that drew Deering to Florida, the sun, the sea, the lush vegetation, became the primary forces of its destruction. The house, an artificial European transplant, entered into a long, slow, and losing battle with the relentless, corrosive power of the subtropical climate. The process of decay is a quiet, insidious one. It began with the salt. The air at Vizcaya is thick with aerosolized salt from Biscayne Bay, an invisible mist that settles on every surface. For the ancient Italian limestone and the imported European marble, this was a chemical assault they were never meant to endure. The salt penetrated the porous stone, causing it to spall and crumble. It ate away at the mortar between the blocks. The intricate wrought iron gates and grills, masterpieces of Spanish and Italian craftsmanship, began to rust, their delicate scrollwork bleeding orange stains onto the pale stone. The magnificent stone barge, constantly battered by waves, eroded, its sharp, sculptural lines softening and blurring under the ceaseless action of the water. Inside the house, the enemy was the humidity. The air, thick with moisture, was a constant threat to the collection of priceless antiques. The wood of 17th century cabinets and 18th century paneling swelled and warped, joints separating and veneers peeling. The delicate gesso and gold leaf on picture frames cracked. The threads of Renaissance tapestries grew brittle. A faint, musty smell of mold, the scent of slow decomposition, began to permeate the grand rooms. It was the smell of the jungle trying to reclaim the palace. The fight was not just against the air, but against the living environment. The manicured gardens required a constant army of gardeners to hold back the rampant growth of native vegetation. Left untended for even a short time, vines would snake up the walls, and the roots of tropical plants would pry apart the stone pathways. Termites, a scourge of wooden structures in Florida, posed a constant threat to the very framework of the house and the priceless wooden artifacts within it. And then there were the hurricanes, the ultimate expression of nature's power. The storms of 1926 and 1935, and later Hurricane Andrew in 1992, would inflict massive damage, shattering windows, tearing off roof tiles, and flooding the lower levels. These catastrophic events were punctuation marks in the long, slow sentence of decay, violent reminders that this carefully constructed European fantasy was built in one of the most volatile weather zones on the planet. This ongoing battle against nature is a powerful metaphor for the entire Vizcaya project. Deering and Chalfon's vision was an attempt to impose an artificial order on a chaotic natural world. In the decades after Deering's death, with diminished resources to fight back, that natural world began to reassert its dominance. The house, personified, was engaged in a struggle for its own life. The very thing that made it beautiful and unique, its location, was also the source of its greatest vulnerability. It is a poignant, tragic irony. The house built as a fortress against the decay of a human body now found itself succumbing to its own slow, inexorable decay, a victim of the very same forces of time and nature that its creator had sought so desperately to defy. The slow corrosion of the stone is the house's own form of aging, a physical manifestation of the passage of time that no amount of wealth or will could ultimately prevent. By the early 1950s, it was clear to James Deering's heirs that they could no longer sustain Vizcaya. The cost of maintenance was crippling, and the house was deteriorating. Faced with the prospect of breaking up the estate and selling its contents, they made a momentous decision. In 1952, they donated the main house and its formal gardens to Dade County, the precursor to today's Miami-Dade County, for the price of $1 million, a sum intended to cover the value of the home's contents and provide a small endowment for its future. The condition of the donation was that Vizcaya be operated as a public museum, its collections preserved and its doors open to everyone. This act of philanthropy marked the beginning of Vizcaya's second life. The private sanctuary, the fortress of solitude built by a reclusive industrialist, was reborn as a public institution. The transition was a profound one. The house that was designed to keep the world out now had to invite the world in. The iron gates, once closed to all but a select few, were swung open. Tourists from across the country and around the world began to walk the halls where Deering had sought peace. School children now had field trips in the gardens where he had strolled in quiet contemplation. The transformation was not without its ironies. The very purpose of the house was inverted. Its success was no longer measured by the comfort of its owner, but by the number of tickets sold at its entrance. The quiet, contemplative atmosphere was replaced by the chatter of tour groups and the clicking of cameras. The house had to adapt to survive. Ropes and stanchions were erected to protect the delicate furniture. Interpretive signs were placed in the rooms, explaining the history that Chalfin had so carefully invented. The hidden, secret world of the downstairs was no longer hidden. The kitchens, the servants' quarters, and the machinery in the basement became part of the tour, a fascinating glimpse into the social and technological history of the estate. The invisible army of workers, once erased from the narrative, was now a central part of the story. This new life as a museum effectively saved Vizcaya from ruin. The resources of the county, combined with private fundraising and later the creation of the Vizcaya Museum and Gardens Trust, provided the financial stability needed to undertake the massive, ongoing project of restoration and conservation. The war against the climate could now be fought with the tools of modern museum science. The house, which had been decaying, was stabilized and preserved for future generations. But this rebirth came at a cost to the original vision. The house is no longer a home. It is an exhibit of a home. The illusion of a lived-in space so central to Chalfin and Deering's concept is necessarily broken. We, the public, are no longer guests in a private residence. We are visitors in a curated space. We are observers of a lifestyle, not participants in it. Is this a betrayal of Deering's intent? Or is it its ultimate fulfillment? He built Vizcaya to create a lasting legacy, to carve his name into stone. In becoming a public museum, the house has achieved a form of immortality that private ownership could never have guaranteed. His personal dream has become a shared cultural treasure. The lonely palace has found a new purpose, not as a sanctuary for one man's anxieties, but as a place of education and inspiration for millions. It is a paradox Deering himself may have appreciated. In losing its privacy, Vizcaya ultimately found its salvation. We return to where we began, to the edge of Biscayne Bay, as dusk settles over the estate. The lights within the house begin to glow, casting a warm, inviting luminescence through the arched windows. From a distance, Vizcaya looks alive, a timeless European villa hosting a grand evening affair. It is a perfect illusion, a nightly performance for the modern world. The house is still doing what it was always designed to do, to project an image of effortless grace, timeless beauty, and aristocratic permanence. But now we know the truth that lies behind the facade. We know the cost in both treasure and human toil. We know about the roaring machines in the basement, the hidden passages for the invisible staff, and the silent, desperate battle against decay. We know that this monument to life was born from a profound fear of death. We, the public, have become the final audience for James Deering's grand production. We wander through the rooms of his fortress of solitude, and in doing so, we complete the circuit of his ambition. He built this place to be seen, to be admired, to stand as a testament to his taste and his wealth. In its current life as a museum, it fulfills that function more completely than it ever did during his lifetime. The house has become a mirror. It reflects the core contradiction of the American Gilded Age, a nation built on industry and democratic ideals that was nonetheless obsessed with the trappings of European aristocracy and feudalism. It shows us the frantic effort of new money to purchase the legitimacy of old money, the desire to invent a history where none existed. Vizcaya is not just a house. It is a physical manifestation of a cultural identity crisis. On a deeper level, it reflects a timeless and universal human struggle. It is a story about the desire to control our environment, to create order out of chaos, and to build something that will outlast our own fragile lives. James Deering's battle with his own mortality is a drama we all understand. His attempt to build a fortress against the inevitable is a fantasy we have all, in some small way, entertained. The ultimate lesson of Vizcaya is one of beautiful, tragic futility. Deering succeeded in creating a masterpiece. He built one of the most astonishing homes in America. He carved his legacy into the Florida coastline. But the fortress failed, could not heal his body, could not stop the march of time, and it could not hold back the forces of the natural world it sought to dominate. Today, the house stands as a magnificent survivor, a testament not to the triumph of one man's will, but to the constant, ongoing effort of preservation required to keep such a dream alive. It is a beautiful ghost, haunted by the ambitions of its creator and the labor of its builders. As the last light fades from the sky and the reflection of the house shimmers on the dark water of the bay, we are left with a final, unsettling question. Was this a sanctuary, or was it a cage? The answer, like the house itself, is beautiful, complex, and forever shrouded in a gilded gloom. The very stone of Vizcaya is a testament to a foundational lie. The oolitic limestone, quarried locally in Florida, is rich with the fossils of marine life, a testament to the region's geological history. Yet, it was carved and assembled to mimic the ancient stones of Italy, a deliberate effort to mask its true origin and imbue it with a fraudulent European pedigree. This single detail encapsulates the entire philosophical project of the estate. It is an exercise in transplantation, not just of objects, but of identity. The house is an immigrant, stripped of its native context and forced to assimilate into a new and often hostile environment. The effort to maintain this illusion is relentless. Every day, conservators and maintenance staff work to repair the damage inflicted by the climate, essentially fighting a rearguard action against the house's own geography. They are the modern-day equivalents of Deering's servants, a new invisible army engaged in the perpetual task of keeping the fantasy from collapsing under the weight of reality. When you walk the grounds, you are walking through a landscape of immense control. Every plant, every statue, every pathway is the result of a deliberate choice designed to evoke a specific European precedent. The gardens are not a celebration of the Florida ecosystem. They are a repudiation of it. They are a declaration that the swamps and hammocks of the tropics are inferior to the manicured parterres of Versailles or the romantic grottos of an Italian villa. This assertion of cultural superiority is at the heart of the Gilded Age aesthetic. It was an era when American industrialists, having conquered their own continent through commerce and technology, looked to Europe for cultural validation. They couldn't inherit a title, but they could buy a duke's ballroom. They couldn't be born into a palazzo, but they could build a better one. Vizcaya is perhaps the most extreme and theatrical example of this phenomenon, a place where the American fortune is spent not on celebrating America, but on escaping it. The house is a time machine, but it only travels in one direction, backward and to another continent. This escape was, of course, incomplete. The very technologies that made Vizcaya possible, the electricity, the modern plumbing, the reinforced concrete structure, were products of the industrial age Deering was fleeing. The house is a hybrid, a pre-modern fantasy built on a hyper-modern chassis. This internal contradiction is what makes it so fascinating. It is not an authentic Italian villa. It is an American's idea of an Italian villa, brought to life with American engineering and American money. It is a dream, And like all dreams, it is a distorted reflection of the dreamer's own reality, anxieties, and desires. To analyze Vizcaya is to peel back layers of artifice. You peel back the European fantasy to find an American industrialist. You peel back the architectural grandeur to find a hidden technological core. You peel back the story of a single man to find the story of 1,000 laborers. You peel back the illusion of permanence to find a constant, desperate battle against decay. What remains at the core is a profound statement about the human relationship with history, nature, and mortality. It suggests that while we can buy the artifacts of the past, we cannot inhabit it. We can tame nature, but we can never truly conquer it. And we can build monuments to defy death, but they will ultimately serve only as our most beautiful and elaborate tombstones. What then is the ultimate legacy of this place? Is it a cautionary tale about hubris, a monument to the folly of a man who tried to build a wall against reality? Or is it a triumphant story of preservation, a testament to the enduring power of art and architecture to inspire and educate future generations? The truth, as with Vizcaya itself, is a complex blend of both. In its first life, the house was a deeply flawed and tragic creation. It was built on a foundation of social inequality, its beauty a direct result of the hidden, grueling labor of an underclass. It was an ecological imposition, achieved through the destruction of a native habitat. And it was a personal failure, a sanctuary that provided no ultimate salvation for its creator. The dream of Vizcaya, as conceived by James Deering, was unsustainable, solitary, and ultimately sad. It was a perfect stage for a play that closed almost as soon as it opened. However, in its second life as a public museum, Vizcaya has found a form of redemption. The very elements that were once problematic have become its most powerful teaching tools. The upstairs/downstairs dichotomy is no longer a social reality to be concealed, but a historical lesson to be taught. The tour through the service areas gives a voice to the voiceless, honoring the labor that was once erased. The conflict between the imported European design and the native Florida environment is now a central part of the narrative, sparking conversations about conservation, climate change, and the relationship between culture and nature. The story of Deering's personal health struggles, once a private tragedy, has become a universal tale of human vulnerability, a poignant reminder of the limits of wealth and power in the face of our own biology. The house has transcended its origins. It is no longer just a reflection of one man's anxieties, but a mirror for our own. We see in it our own desires for beauty, for permanence, for a legacy. We see our own struggles with the passage of time and the inevitability of change. The transformation from a private home to a public trust is a story of democratization. The art and history that were once the exclusive property of a single individual are now a shared resource, belonging to the community. The house has been given a new, more noble purpose. Its value is no longer measured in the market price of its antiques, but in its ability to provoke thought, to inspire awe, and to connect us to a complex and fascinating chapter of our collective past. The final legacy of Vizcaya, therefore, is one of transformation. It is a story of how a place built for the most private of reasons can find its greatest meaning in the most public of roles. It is a testament to the idea that beauty, even when born of questionable motives, can ultimately serve a greater good. The house that was built as an escape from the world has become a vital and cherished part of it. The gilded cage has opened its doors, and in doing so has finally, truly set itself free.